The recycled air of Station Kara 7 tasted metallic, a constant reminder that humanity had clawed its way into the stars through sheer stubbornness rather than elegance. Daniel Chien stood at the viewport of Docking Bay 12, watching another refugee transport settle into its cradle with a hiss of equalizing pressure. 3 years since first contact. 3 years since the Draconians had arrived, not as conquerors or enlightened benefactors, but as survivors fleeing the Vex swarm that had consumed their homeworld. Daniel adjusted his maintenance rig harness and descended the platform. His shift had technically ended an hour ago, but the station master had put out a call for volunteers. The newest transport carried 200 Draconian refugees, and the xenophobia brewing in certain sectors made even simple processing dangerous. The airlock cycled open with a pneumatic wheeze. They emerged in groups, these remnants of a once proud species. Scales that should have shimmered like oil on water were dull with malnutrition. Wings that could have spanned 30 feet hung limp and folded, atrophied from months in cramped ships. The Draconians had been apex predators on their world, had reached the stars through bioengineering rather than machines, had considered themselves the galaxy's rightful inheritors. Now they shuffled through human-built corridors, clutching identification chips. Their vertical slit eyes, tracking every movement with prey animal wariness. Daniel found his assigned group near Processing Station 3, 15 Draconians, mostly juveniles. The UN Refugee Commission had determined that younger ones adapted better, learned standard faster, caused fewer incidents. It was cold calculus dressed up as compassion. She was at the back of the group. Daniel had processed hundreds of Draconians by now, had learned to read their body language, the subtle color shifts in their scales that indicated emotion. But Jassy, he glimpsed her designation on his tablet, was different. Where others held themselves with either defiance or defeat, she seemed to be disappearing into herself. Her scales were a mottled gray-green, like tarnished copper. One wing dragged slightly, probably damaged during evacuation. She couldn't have been more than 16 in Draconian years, still showing the rounded features of adolescence. But her eyes held something much older. "Next," Daniel called, scanning the Q.JASSIE approached the processing station with mechanical steps. Up close, he could see the tremor in her hands, the way her claws clicked together in what his training identified as acute stress response. "Name?" "Jassy." Her voice was barely a whisper, the sibilant Draconian accent making the S linger. "Jassy Therakor, clutch of broken wings, last of my ... She stopped. Her throat worked silently. Daniel kept his expression neutral, professional. "I just need the designation name for the forms." "Jassy works fine." He ran through the standard questions. Medical screening status, educational background, skills assessment. She answered in monosyllables, each word seeming to cost her something. When he asked about family, she simply shook her head. The entire interaction took 12 minutes. By regulation, he should have sent her to temporary housing with the others, processed the next refugee, maintained the efficient flow that kept the station running. But something made him pause. "Jassy," he said quietly, "have you eaten today?" She blinked, as if the question didn't make sense. "The meal vouchers don't activate until tomorrow," she said. Protocol. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. Protocol. Humanity had become very good at protocol in the last 3 years, at systems and procedures that kept the refugee crisis manageable. It was easier to process thousands when you didn't think about them as individuals. As people who had lost everything, he pulled out his personal meal card. "There's a commissary on level 8, show them this, get something with protein. The Draconian safe options are marked in green." Jassy stared at the card like it was a weapon. I cannot accept." "You are human. We are the lesser now. We take only what is given, only what is earned." The way she said it, like reciting a catechism learned through repetition and pain, made Daniel's jaw tighten. "You're not lesser," he said. "You're a person who needs to eat. Take the card." She took it with shaking hands, held it against her chest like a talisman. And then so quietly he almost missed it. "Could you give me a hug, please?" The words hung in the recycled air between them. Daniel had been trained for many scenarios. Aggressive refugees, traumatized refugees, refugees who tried to bribe or manipulate. But this raw, desperate request from a teenage alien who looked at him like he might be the last source of kindness in the universe? There was no protocol for this. He stepped around the processing station. Jassie's eyes widened, and for a moment he thought she might run. But she stood frozen as he approached, her damaged wing twitching involuntarily. Daniel had learned that draconians ran hot, their scaled bodies radiating heat like organic furnaces. He'd learned their language structure, their dietary requirements, their social hierarchies. But he'd never touched one. Not like this. He opened his arms and stepped forward. Jassie collapsed into the embrace like a puppet with cut strings. Her whole body shook as she pressed her face against his shoulder, and Daniel felt the dampness of tears soaking through his uniform. The sobs came in hitching gasps, 3 years of grief and trauma and loss pouring out all at once. "I lost them all," she choked out between sobs. "My clutch mates, my parents, my teachers. The Vex came, and we ran, and I was small enough I fit in the escape pod, but they didn't. They pushed me in, and they didn't fit, and I heard them screaming as the Vex—" "I know," Daniel whispered, his own voice cracking. "I know." He didn't, not really. Humanity had been lucky, arriving late to the galactic stage after the Vex had been mysteriously contained. But he could imagine. He held this crying dragon girl and imagined watching everyone. He loved being torn apart by machines that ate worlds. Other station personnel were staring. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked disgusted. Daniel met their eyes one by one until they looked away. They stood there for 5 minutes, 10, however long it took for Jassie's sobs to fade into shaking breaths. For the worst of the storm to pass, when she finally pulled back, her scales had shifted to a warmer bronze-tone embarrassment. Gratitude, something close to hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "In my culture, physical comfort is reserved for clutch mates, for family. I have been so long without touch, without connection. I thought I had forgotten what it felt like to be ... real." Daniel wiped at his own eyes, not caring who saw. "You're real, Jassie. You survived. That matters." She nodded slowly, clutching his meal card like a lifeline. "Humans," she said softly, "are not what we were told. We thought you were the weak ones, the newcomers who would crumble. But you have strength we never understood." "What kind of strength?" "The strength to be kind when kindness costs you something. The strength to see people instead of protocols." She managed a small, sharp-toothed smile. "The strength to hug a monster." "You're not a monster," Daniel said firmly. "You're a kid who needed a hug. There's nothing monstrous about that." He watched her walk away toward the commissary, her damaged wing held a little higher, her steps a little steadier. Behind him, the processing queue had backed up. His supervisor would probably write him up for the delay. Daniel didn't care. He turned back to the station, pulled up the next name on his tablet, and called out, "Next." But something had shifted. Each refugee who approached now wasn't just a designation, a case number, a problem to be efficiently processed. They were people, survivors, individuals carrying their own losses, their own hopes, their own desperate need for connection in a cold universe. It was going to make his job harder, caring like this. More complicated. More painful, but as Daniel worked through the rest of his shift, he kept thinking about Jassie's words. About strength that humanity didn't even recognize in itself. About the radical act of kindness in a galaxy that had become very good at cruelty. Maybe that was what HFY really meant. Not humanity's weapons or technology or stubborn refusal to die, but the simple, revolutionary choice to see suffering and reach out. Anyway, to give a hug when one was desperately needed. To recognize the person behind the scales. The designation, the protocol, that night. Lying in his cramped quarters, Daniel received a message on his personal comm. An anonymous text. "Thank you for seeing me." He smiled in the darkness, composed a reply, then deleted it. Some moments didn't need words. Tomorrow there would be more refugees, more processing, more protocol. But tonight, A scared dragon girl had cried on his shoulder and remembered what it felt like to be real. And somehow, in a station orbiting a distant star, in a galaxy still healing from unspeakable horrors, that felt like enough. It felt like hope,